Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a few initial tonal tweaks to improve your image inside Adobe Camera Raw. You can see here I'm using a RAW file, but if you have a JPEG or a TIFF file you can right click it in Adobe Bridge here and choose Open in Camera Raw, but because I'm using a RAW file I simply need to double click it and that will open it into the Adobe Camera Raw plugin. Now, Adobe Camera Raw is very easy to navigate. You have a series of panels accessed via these icons here at the top of the settings on the right. By default, we open in the basic panel, which is the best place to begin editing your image. So I'm going to start at the top of the basic panel here and then work my way down through the sliders. First of all, I'm going to use the temperature slider, and this allows me to adjust the white balance. So I'm going to drag that down slightly to cool the image down because I think it's slightly too warm. I can set it to around 4650, and perhaps we could just bring tint slightly down to take out a touch of magenta. So this is all just about fine-tuning the white balance. If we want, we can choose one of these presets here, or we can grab the white balance tool from the toolbar up here, and then we can click over a tone in the image that we know to be white or grey. So perhaps if we click over the woman's top here, you can see how that gives us a result very similar to the white balance that we chose, with temperature at 4650, tint at +25. Now, moving on from the white balance options, we have these series of sliders: exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, that allow us to change the brightness of different tones in the image. The exposure slider will control the overall brightness. I can drag that up to about +6 and that will lighten the image overall. I can also perhaps boost contrast with the contrast slider here. I think we'll bring that up slightly as well, just to make the image a little bit more punchy. I think +16 is working well. Now, the highlights and shadow sliders here allow us to manipulate certain areas of the tonal range. So I can drag the highlights down here and you can see how this will reveal lots of detail in the sky here. If I drag it up, you can see how that's losing that detail. I'm going to leave the highlights at 0 for now because I'm going to selectively adjust the sky later using a different tool. And the shadows does a similar thing with the shadow range here. So if I drag up, we can reveal lots more detail in the shadows and create a kind of HDR effect. If I drag down, you can see how that's darkening down the shadows. I think we'll just drag them up slightly to about +5. Now, the white and black sliders control the points in which the image becomes pure white or pure black. So I can hold Alt and drag either of these sliders for a view of the image that shows me any pixels that are being clipped to pure black or pure white. And I don't want any clipped pixels at all. So I'm going to hold Alt and drag the white slider here. And you can see there's a few areas up here that are starting to go clipped. If I drag it to the right, you can see how those areas increase. I'm just going to double click the white slider to reset it to 0, and then again hold Alt and drag it. I'm just going to drag back very slightly to about -8, and you can see those areas up there disappear. And that means that we've recovered a few details in those brightest tones there. Now I'm going to do the same with the black slider here. I'm going to hold Alt and drag that, and you can see if I drag it upwards nothing happens, but if I drag downwards these areas here begin to go fully black. So I want to bring it to a point where those areas start to turn black, somewhere around -16 there I think is good. Next I'm going to move on to the clarity slider, and this allows me to boost mid-tone contrast to bring out some detail in the building here. You can see if I drag it right up to 100 how that's bringing out lots of detail and making those edges glow, but it's starting to look a little bit overcooked. So I'm going to drag that back to about +25, somewhere around there. And the final two sliders here at the bottom of the basic panel are vibrance and saturation, and these allow you to control the color intensity. Now, saturation works across the image. If I drag up to +100, you can see how that increases all of the colors in the image, and if I drag back to -100, you can see how that gets rid of all of the color information. I can double click it again to reset it to 0. Now, vibrance targets the less saturated colors. So if I drag that up, you can see how we can increase the less saturated colors, which are the blues in the sky, while keeping the yellows in the building fairly consistent. Now I'm going to drag vibrance back to about -30 just to give my image a slightly retro feel by reducing some of the colors there. And I'm fairly happy with the changes we've made there. I can turn the preview box here on or off to see a before and after of all of those edits. And I think that's looking good, but I think we still have quite an unbalanced image here where the top right and the bottom left are looking too bright and the top left and the bottom right are looking too dark. So I can balance out the image using selective adjustments. First of all, I'm going to grab the graduated filter tool from the toolbar up here. And you can see once I've highlighted the tool, we get a very similar set of sliders over here to the basic panel, but we also have these options for sharpness, noise reduction, moire, and defringe. And below them we have an option to add a colour. And the difference between these sliders and those in the basics panel is that these are going to be applied just to the area that we select with the graduated filter tool. And we can click and drag with the tool to create two lines. And you can see how the area above the green line is going to be completely affected by the changes we make to the sliders. The area below the red line is going to remain unaffected, and between the red and green points we have a nice blend between the tones. So I'm going to drag that red point down to about there. You can see how we can darken down that top right corner to reveal some more detail in the sky. And the great thing about working in Adobe Camera Raw here is that we can tweak any of the changes we make at any point. So the settings over here are never set in stone. We can adjust exposure if you want to lighten that area again, but I think obviously we want to darken it down. I think somewhere around minus 1.10 is working well. We'll reset contrast to 0, and perhaps we'll bring highlights back to about minus 60. And I think clarity at a negative value is going to soften that area quite nicely. And perhaps we could just bring saturation down to about plus 30. Incidentally, all of these settings here are just remembered from the last time you used the tool, so you need to be careful that you don't reapply the same settings if you want to create a completely different set of adjustments. So for example, the temperature slider is set at 6, but we really want that to be set at 0. So I'm fairly happy with that top right corner. Now I'm going to move on and lighten these areas around here, and I'm going to do this with the adjustment brush, which sits next to the graduated filter tool up here in the toolbar. And you can see that gives us the exact same set of sliders over here. So I'm just going to reset all my sliders before I begin, because it remembers the changes we made when we used the graduated filter tool. So you can see they're all reset to 0. Then I'm just going to bring exposure up to about plus 0.65, and if I click anywhere over the image, you'll see how that sets a pin, and then I can paint over the image to add to the area covered by that pin. So you can see I'm just painting around this area here, and you can see this is giving me a pink tone. That's because if we scroll down to the bottom of the adjustment brush settings here, you can see I have show mask checked, and I've chosen a mask overlay color of that bright pink, and that just gives me an idea of where I'm painting. I can uncheck show mask, and you can see that brings us back to a view of the image, and you can see the area that we're painting over is being affected by that change to exposure that we made. So I can paint over this area here, and you can see how that's working to brighten these parts of the image. Now I also want to darken down this corner here, so I'm going to click New up here, and then I can click over the corner here, the area that we want to fix, and you can see how that sets a second pin. And then I can go up to my exposure settings here, and this time I'll drag it down to about minus 0.6, and then I can paint over this area, and you can see how that works to darken down the tones. So you can see how quick and easy it is to make selective adjustments to lighten or darken certain areas of your image. And if I check and uncheck the preview box here, you can see that's the before and that's the after, and that's much more balanced. Next, I'm just going to make a couple of other quick edits to improve my image. So I'm going to click back on the zoom tool, and that will bring me back to a view where I can see all the different panels along the top right here. And I'm going to go to the lens correction panel. And if you have a look in the image here, you can see the top of the building here, which should be straight, is bowed slightly, and that's because of distortion caused by using a wide angle lens. So I'm going to fix the distortion by going to the profile options here and checking this option to enable lens profile corrections, and you can see how that fixes that line, so it's now perfectly straight. But you can see now it's not perfectly horizontal, so I'm going to grab the straighten tool, which is this one here, and then I can click and drag a line that follows the line at the top of the building there, and that will straighten my image if I just hit enter to apply the straightening. And then if I go to the crop tool here, you can see we can fine tune the crop by dragging the corners of the bounding box here. So I think something like that is going to work well. You can just fine tune the positioning. And then I can hit enter to apply that, but we can go back to the crop tool whenever we like and tweak the crop. And finally, the last thing I'm going to do is to use the post-crop vignetting settings that are found in the effects panel here to darken down the corners. I'm just going to drag the amount back to about -23, something like that. If I toggle the preview on or off, you can see the effect that has. That just helps to draw the eye into the image. I think perhaps it may be slightly too strong. I'll bring it back to about -17. And as I said before, any of these changes that we made can be edited whenever you like. So we have all of the settings here remembered. If we go back to the different tools, you can see how we can tweak any of the tool changes that we made on any of these points or pins. This is the great thing about working in Camera Raw. But I'm happy with all of those changes, so I can show you a quick before and after of the effect. If I go to my snapshot panel here, I'm just going to click here to create a new snapshot. We'll call it after. And then if I click the flyout menu here, I can choose reset Camera Raw defaults to bring us back to our original image. And then if I click on the after snapshot, you can see that's the before and that's the after. So that's how you can make a series of quick and useful edits inside Adobe Camera Raw. There's obviously plenty more to discover hidden inside these different panels here, but I'm happy with my image for now, so I'm going to click Open Image to bring it into Photoshop.